Hi everyone, hello from Singapore. Thank you for taking the time to join us for today's event on reconstructing supply chain to deep technology. My name is Jody from SGInnovate, and for those of you who may be more new to us, we are a government-owned organization in Singapore with the mission to build deep tech innovations from Singapore and for the world. We do so by investing in and helping build deep tech startups in the fields of AI, medtech, quantum tech, and we're also starting to look into new areas such as urban solutions and sustainability, advanced manufacturing, and food and agri-tech. We also work with entrepreneurial scientists and clinicians to help build their innovative research from lab to market, as well as develop deep tech talent. We also engage with the vibrant deep tech ecosystem, and part of our initiatives to strengthen the ecosystem and generate conversation and knowledge sharing is through community events such as the one that we have today. Today's webinar will involve an exciting panel of supply chain experts who will discuss the developments of deep tech innovations in the global supply chain and what the future holds for these technologies even during the COVID-19 pandemic. Without further ado, I'd like to pass the time over to our moderator, Mark, to help to start the session. Mark, please.
Thank you very much, Jody. Firstly, Happy New Year, everyone. Right, welcome to today's discussion on reconstructing supply chains with deep technology. Now, like what Jody said, we are very fortunate to have a great panel of experts today to discuss this topic. And to open, I would like to ask the panel to do a quick 1-minute introduction of themselves, followed by the most significant impact of COVID for them last year. So with that, I'll start the ball rolling. Hi, my name is Mark Dragon. I'm the Managing Director of rethink Investments, a global supply chain technology venture capital firm based out of Singapore. The most significant impact for COVID, besides doing investments through this COVID period without flying, was the challenge of moving house in the midst of circuit breaker. So that was immensely stressful and took many months more than planned, right? And I'll ask the panel to also share themselves, their perspectives, and of course, introduction. May, you would like to go next?
Hi, Mark. Can you hear me? You can hear me, yeah?
Yes.
Hi, great to meet you on a panel setup. We've been saying we wanted to meet in person, but haven't quite done so. So it's great to see you virtually. So thanks, SGInnovate, for organizing this so all friends can catch up. For me, personally, I've been in the logistics sector for almost 20 years. Most parts of it looking into helping companies strategize their supply chain networks. I've dabbled into innovation for a number of years, setting up DHL's first Asia-Pacific Innovation Center, and led a team there looking at different opportunities in technology for our clientele. And in the more recent last 12 months, I have taken over the role of the global practice partner for supply chain and analytics for DHL Consulting, which is a division within DHL that does advisory business. Personally, it was just a very interesting time, particularly to change into a new role, managing a new team and getting to know clients completely virtually. As you can imagine, doing a supply chain optimization without going to see an actual site can be quite interesting experience. But I think the great thing about human beings is that we are extremely versatile and resilient. Across our operations of 500,000 people at the front line, I'm sure a lot of you have seen some of DHL's colleagues coming to your door delivering essential services. Our business has seen a tremendous, resilience from our frontliners. On the back end, we are supporting and really, upskilling ourselves in virtual tools like this one to really do our work like never before. So for us, it's a new world, it's a new normal, and we are all adjusting to how it will carry on in this new way of life.
Thanks, May. Richard?
Hi, thanks, Mark, and good to see you again. Hi everyone, my name is Wei Chen and I head the EDB's supply chain and connectivity team. EDB is a government agency responsible for industry development and investment promotion. And in my role, I do two things. One, to develop, grow and transform the logistics sector. And two, we are looking at how to develop Singapore as a hub for supply chain management activities. So exciting times because I've just assumed this role about 4 months ago. Previously, I was based in the UK, and the most significant impact was really spending quite a bit of time in self-isolation or SHN, traveling between UK and Singapore. So I think I clocked up to 42 days in isolation. And so if there's anything that I wanted to take away, it's the how we have taken for granted human interactions and the ability to meet physically. So looking forward to meeting all of you in person, actually. Thanks.
42 days, that's quite significant. Maybe let's move on. Chits, a quick introduction of yourself.
Hi, thanks a lot everyone for tuning in. Thanks Mark for setting the tone. So quick background about myself. I'm Chitransh. You can call me Chits. It's easier in Singapore. I'm basically one of the co-founders of GoComet. At GoComet, we are in the space of international freight logistics, and through our technology, we provide different level of solutions to digitize and automate the freight supply chain, that is international freight supply chain. From my perspective, COVID was a bit of it still is, like, because my family is back in India and my parents and my sister, they're all doctors. And they were in the front line for managing the entire COVID situation in India. It still is a little out of control. So for me, it was initially quite stressful. Now, it is still stressful, but I've kind of gotten used to it. So yeah, I'm hoping that we solve things soon with some vaccines and innovation. Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Chits. Fabian, on to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Fabien Tertois. I'm head of innovation at Bolloré Logistics in Singapore. So basically, my mission is to try and catch up DHL on innovation and what we can do in implementing technology for our customers. So we are a bit behind, but I think we're catching up. So beware. My personal take on the COVID, I think, I have two young boys at home. I knew they were a bit noisy and a bit energetic, but I can tell you the circuit breaker with homeschooling and having all of a sudden everybody going from the office to working from home and learning how to use Teams and Skype. Yes, we were that behind. This was a real tough time, and I'm really glad that now at least the schools are open again and that we can go back to office from time to time, so that at least I can have a breather when I'm in office. But as May mentioned, I think this time really showed that I think in all our companies we have amazing people that are really committed to their jobs and doing amazing work. And from one day to the next, almost overnight, we had people taking the desktop computers home and setting up a small part of their home to be able to work from home for nobody knew that at that time how long. And we managed to do it, and we did. I think we did a pretty good job of it. So a lot of pride on our side to have gone through this so well. But I think everybody is also eager for some kind of normalcy to come back. But then time will tell how normal things go back to.
Thank you, Fabian. So let's deep dive into the topic today, right? Deep technology and supply chains. Maybe to start off with, I'll pass it back to May, right? DHL recently released a paper on post-coronavirus supply chain recovery, right? So maybe you can share some key insights and findings from this paper, and how is it relevant for us, especially in this region?
Yeah, thanks, Mark, for that. So the first point is, Fabian, unfortunately, the new normal is not coming anytime soon. I'm sure you also know that from your business. Within the paper, it describes a little bit how the new normal will come. And I think for us, we need to be prepared for a phase of a pre-new normal phase where things are still quite uncertain. Demands are still spiking, and with new COVID variants coming up, popping up everywhere, and the uncertainties of how the vaccines is going to turn out, I think we continue to be very cautious as to what the new normal when the new normal can come. But nevertheless, there are three things described in the paper that really urge companies to consider. The first one is resilience. Resilience has become a key priority for many companies that has taken this for granted for many years. Companies really ought to look at their strategic network and inventory strategies and policies to really tune up the flexibilities that they need to, be prepared for these uncertainties in their supplies. That's really driven then by the second point on where demands can spike in different parts of the world. Being able to react to demand shifts, being able to appreciate the bullwhip effects where your supplies and manufacturing processes may or may not be able to handle some of these very last minute changes in their supply chain requirements. And last, what we observe is as well within the operations, how do we ensure that our people work safely in a clean and and following social distancing protocols that is new to all of us. These are the three key highlights that we've observed, and there are many different ways to tackle them. And a lot of times we look to technology to help us allow for these key topics to be addressed.
Thanks, May. A follow-on question here would be around, when we talk about deep tech and technologies, it can be AI, it can be drones, or it can even be automation, robotics, and stuff like that, right? And then we sort of try to apply that back to, this whole resilience and managing demand, right? Managing safety, right? So what's your perspectives in terms of which are the key technology elements that are really relevant here? Or do you think that, it is more process related and operating procedure related type of question?
I think at the end of the day, it's a mix of many topics. In logistics, oftentimes we already see a lot of benefits looking at process improvements, continuous improvements, maybe introducing some old tech versus deep tech, or simple tech versus deep tech. If you read some of the articles on deep tech, to be honest, it is quite confusing how you define deep tech these days. I think that the lines are pretty much blurring, but at the end of the day, in a lot of the Asian market, I think practically you see challenges in terms of data availability, particularly in markets that are traditionally very manual and labor intensive. Cost base and cost sensitivities of businesses in Asia tend to be more sensitive, and that we need to be cognizant. A lot of deep tech and high automation solutions may not necessarily be applicable in our region. And last point is really about the right skilled labor to allow us to venture into some of these technology over time. So this is sort of the theme that I did see. If you go to the DHL Innovation Center, you see a lot of fancy cool stuff. That's not broadly applicable to every site and every country. There are showcase countries and markets where are more suitable for automation, but there are other countries that's more looking at low-cost sensor, for example, as a step towards creating better visibility to our customers' supply chain.
Thank you, May. And I'll circle back to you later when it comes to that whole visibility question and the application into the region as well. I think that's a topic that we will want to zoom down a little bit into. maybe let's move on to Richard. So, with EDB, right? I think you're in an interesting position here because, you have a visibility to the macro trends and the macro decisions pertaining to Singapore, right? So, specifically, what are EDB's findings and perspectives around supply chain risk and macro factors, especially when it pertains to corporate decisions around supply chain networks in Asia, and the implications of that to Singapore? It's a very long mouthful, but maybe you can help to sort of decompose and answer that.
No, thanks, Mark. Actually, I wanted to route back to what May said, and it's not just because I had read some of her interviews just before this seminar. She mentioned about reviewing inventory policy in one of her interviews with Business Insider. But the point that she made earlier about resilience, it's a buzzword in some ways because it's one of those things that we keep mentioning last year after supply chain disruptions that we saw. And for us, it's always about translating those trends into what does it mean for us as economic developers. And for us, what we've noticed is there's increasing number of companies reaching out to us to tell us about how they would like to set up regional distribution centers in Singapore. And I'm sure Fabian and May's counterparts within their organizations would have heard of some of this interest. And primarily because Singapore has remained quite a reliable and connected hub throughout the course of the pandemic. And so companies are thinking about how to create a resilience by putting some of the inventory in Singapore, where you could be certain that your goods can flow out of Singapore, because we've not imposed certain export bans, for instance, on medical supplies or PPE. At the same time, it's also thinking about how you could better distribute to your customers in markets, and especially in a fairly uncertain time where you're not quite sure which port will get congested or which city will get locked down. Choosing a location like Singapore guarantees a little bit of that in your distribution strategies. So I think that's one kind of like macro trend that has translated into something for us. And the other trend that I've seen, and it's more related to diversification and not quite just about COVID, not also quite about just US-China tensions, but really the growth of Southeast Asia as a production base. You have started to see some of these sectors shifting the supply chains down to the region. And with it has meant that quite a number of companies have started to think about locating their supply chain management hubs in Singapore, be it to run procurement or sourcing out of Singapore, because the suppliers base have just grown in Southeast Asia. So we are hearing a little bit more of those interests. And so actually our role is really to see how we can capture these opportunities or enable companies to set up base in Singapore.
Thanks, Richard. I think let's zoom in there a little bit as well. You mentioned resilience and regional DCs, right? Inventory, transportation in and out, flows in and out of Singapore. I think all those are very relevant. Which industries do you see, to have the most interest to move in this direction?
I hesitate to give a really informed answer because I've been back for 4 months, so I have a few data points, and it'll be not right for me to call it a trend. But I think what you will see is one, some companies with high value inventory, they tend to want to then base more of that in Singapore, because you can't be placing all this high value inventory in each market. So that's one kind of archetype that I can see. The other could be in terms of, due to the shifts in, from a brick and mortar retail to more e-commerce, you're starting to see companies having to have an e-commerce strategy behind how they locate or stock up their distribution centers. And so for some companies, they have needed to, kind of centralize or consolidate a little bit of that so that they can provide the variety to the customers in region. And I would say that it really depends on the company and the sector and what their strategies are. But I would say that we are starting to see a lot more of this interest across a variety of sectors.
Okay, thanks, Richard. All right, moving on a little bit to Chits, right? I mean, you run a startup, right? And you probably are quite impacted either positively or negatively by COVID, right? I'd like to hear from you, what are the trends that you see in digitization trends that you see in logistics, right? And has COVID, was it a tailwind that supported you and supported these trends, or was it more like a headwind where, clients can't commit and, you were impacted here? What's your perspective? What do you see?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So I'll answer the latter first, right? So for us, COVID was really impactful because suddenly we have like 5-6 offices across Southeast Asia. I mean, Singapore, Thailand, few offices in India, here and there. So it was very hard to suddenly kind of coordinate basic fundamental tech issues, right? So it was like a hit win for us on that perspective. On a customer's level, we deal with a lot of global manufacturing companies, and yes, all of their supply chains were disrupted. I mean, from my perspective, I think I have a bit of a contrarian view here, but like here out. So basically, I feel that the world suddenly moved like years ahead in terms of somehow digitization, but I don't think so from a technology point of view we are there. I mean, we were pushed in a certain direction to move like 10 years ahead. And I don't think so we have the tools or the capabilities to kind of manage this situation. And that's why we are seeing all kinds of problems that are there. And from a digitization perspective, I mean, earlier for us, I mean, for a short term, yes, it was very impactful because all kinds of problems like payments, etc., from customers, all kinds of problems, their basic fundamental supply chains, product had to be tweaked, all kinds of things were happening, right? For instance, Chen was mentioning about the port congestion, right? Suddenly one of our products, using our data, we were able to give the port congestion cycles at all the mostly Asian ports. And then suddenly larger conglomerates, even Fortune 500 companies started to use that, right? We never thought that this product could do something like this, right? So long story short, for short term, it was impactful, but from a midterm or the long term, I would say it has been good for us because now companies don't see it as a value add. They see it as a need, right? So the entire concept of educating a customer to kind of go digital, for their profitability sake of view, it's a less effort from our end, right? And I think still a lot of effort from our end was to kind of ensure that the proper product was delivered, they were using the adaptability and all these things, especially in a report scenario, right? Now, I mean, to sit out of India or sit out of Singapore, remotely deploy it in a very far off place in Thailand, right? It was quite challenging without an office and all that. So yeah, interesting situation, man.
Do you see demand coming back for you, in the second half of last year compared to when COVID hit? Or do you still see it to be, a wait and see type of attitude? The expectation of digitization needs to be there, but then, again, there's a propensity to pay issue. I mean, what do you see?
So again, one of the things that I would again take from Wu Chen's point is, I mean, this is actually a interesting question. So from markets, let's say if you were to sell in US, Europe, right, these kind of markets, it's very difficult because COVID is still raging there. I mean, lack of a better word, it's still raging there, right? And it's probably worse now. But in now places like Singapore, right? Even Thailand to a lot of extent. Malaysia not now, but Singapore, Thailand have been really good. So frankly speaking, last quarter was one of the best quarters what we had in terms of customer closures and collections in our history, right? And that entire wave was ridden by customers in Singapore and Thailand. I mean, and things worked out, right? But to work out in developed markets, it's hard because they did not have the right, I would say, ingredients to kind of tackle COVID. And I can't be diplomatic here, but they did not. So it's still raging, right? Unfortunately, I mean, places like Singapore, a lot of other Asian economies have done much better job with the kind of resources they had to tackle that.
Okay, good. Thanks, Chits. And again, after this, we'll circle back to the topic that Maisel brought up on visibility, and I'd like to hear your perspectives there as well. On to you, Fabian. Right. What are the interesting technologies and capabilities that you are looking at, deploying in your business, right, in emerging countries, and how is that different from Singapore, right? And has COVID impacted that kind of decisions around the kind of capabilities that you are looking to deploy?
How much time do I have to answer this?
2 minutes.
Okay, 2 minutes. Well, that's a challenge. Yeah, there are really a huge amounts of different solutions that we are scouting right now and investigating. So first, emerging countries in the region, they all have their local specificities. They have different regulations, different mindsets, different cultures, different geography. I mean, if you look at archipelago like Indonesia and the Philippines, logistics are totally different than what you can find in Vietnam or Cambodia, for instance. So you have to account for all these local specificities. And of course, the customers and the retailers and the consumers in these markets all behave differently and have different needs. So before COVID, there was already a lot of complexity to manage all this. And we have been scouting for tech for a long time to help us better connect to consumers and to suppliers on these different markets. So that has gone on, of course. There were announcements recently about creating a huge free market across the region that will hopefully help us a lot in that regard. So maybe, for instance, we won't have any more to change trucks when we cross the border to Thailand, which is a huge pain for any supply chain. But I'm not sure deep tech will solve this. This is more a question of regulation. So we've seen in projects around blockchain, for instance, that very often deep tech can provide some answers and can provide some solutions, but usually the wall that we hit is not linked to technical problems that we have. It's more related to regulations, and more as we build ecosystems and partnerships, it's just a question of everybody having to agree on kind of common requirements to build a platform that everybody can use and everybody can benefit from. Now, looking at more hardware related issues, I mean, May mentioned that one of the big thing that was going on right now is traceability and tracing. And in emerging countries, we're looking indeed into a lot of cheap tracking devices, for instance, but that can also abide with local networks and all the constraints that we can find. So this is also a very important trend, especially as we look into vaccines distribution, for instance. But those tech will be here to stay. People are more and more looking at traceability on their products. They want to make sure that their products are not counterfeited, that they know what they are eating, and so on. And something else that we're looking on the different local markets are sustainable solutions, because right now, everybody talks about COVID and is forgetting a bit about climate change, but on the long run, climate change will have a lot more impacts than COVID. So we also have to think about this. And again, this is a lot about local solutions. And as with COVID, we've seen a trend of people switching a lot to e-commerce with all the perks that go with it, especially for supply chain people, because when you go to e-commerce, everybody wants the kind of lowest item, the lowest price products, and nobody wants to pay for delivery. This is a common trend that we can find everywhere for e-commerce. But so this is the push that we see today. But the pull of climate change will mean that fast logistics are not, for us in our perspectives, they're not here to stay. I don't know when, maybe it's in 10 years, 20 years, but when I see, deliveries by drone, delivery within 1 hour, 2 hours, This might be possible in smart cities like Singapore, but this is not something that you can deploy easily globally without major climate impact. Basically, basic physics: the faster you go, the more energy you need, and the less sustainable you are. So all these trends, they mix together, and they have different impacts. And in the end, it's all a question of trade-off for us to know what the customers want and what we can do on a given market. The last thing maybe that is very different in between Singapore and emerging countries is obviously labor costs and costs of land, which calls for very different decisions, especially in terms of automation and robotics. So typically investments that make sense today in Singapore can make absolutely no sense in other countries. That being said, we're seeing a lot more again, push for automation in countries where just maybe 1 year ago we wouldn't consider automation. So for instance, in Malaysia, we're deploying one of our first automated warehouses over there. And 1 year ago, nobody would have even mentioned it. At the same time, because of COVID, a lot of investments are being delayed by our customers. So yeah, it's a kind of messy situation we're in, but we're really looking at emerging countries versus Singapore from all these different angles.
Thanks. I think I'd like to hold on a little bit on the sustainability angle as well, and maybe I'd like to hear some May's thoughts on this as well. What kind of technologies and solutions do you see that are deployable either in Singapore or this region?
Yeah, I was just about to chime in on that front. For us, there is a newfound respect for data. I know, Mark, you and I talked about data-driven supply chains since many years. And now I think whether you are in an emerging country or the state-of-the-art markets, the newfound respect for data and what it can do for business is very strong across board. For the more mature market, we are obviously, with the right history of data, our teams are looking at more predictive use cases. In the more emerging markets where data is not so much at a quality and the length of history that we like to see, we are able to use that visibility to allow us to make continuous improvement much more targeted and much more effective. So worldwide, if there's one thing that DHL as a company is doing everywhere in all levels, is to look at how can we collect timely information from the ground at site one time, right, for the first time, and use that throughout the organization, whether it's from a planning standpoint, long-term, or an operational sort of quality standpoint. So that's something that is quite crucial. And myself in DHL Consulting, we've started, and in my previous capacity, we've started for a few years now, really building that capabilities, because for us as a sector, it's a relatively new capabilities to build in-house. We now have very strong data scientist teams that is helping our businesses all across to look at how we can look at data in a different way. How can we create solutions that are deployable and scalable worldwide?
Got it. Thanks, May. And while I really want to get into the sustainability topic, maybe Fabian, you have some thoughts on the technologies related to sustainability, and then we'll go very quickly into visibility, the data, and the kind of technologies, be it real-time, non-real-time type of a thing, right? So, Fabian, any closing thoughts on the sustainability piece before we get into visibility and the kinds of technologies around visibility?
Yeah, I think May is absolutely right in mentioning that all data management, data analytics tools are very important to know exactly where we are and what kind of impacts the different solutions that we're trying have. For us, what we've seen that is very promising is being able to have very accurate models of our customer supply chain, because where we can have the most impact basically is to move out of air freight as much as possible. So that would be one. On a local basic, we do have a lot of very low tech solutions also to look at, and where deep tech can also help is probably in knowledge management and process mining. So typically, how can we make people aware of the different solutions that we have in a very, very efficient way? So we can look at typically image processing, video processing, so that people can, once they have an idea or something to share, they can do so easily with the automated tagging and stuff like that to make sure that the knowledge is retained and shared across all the boards. So those are a few of the things that we have in our minds as well. Fortunately, with limited resource capabilities, right now we have other priorities. So we kind of parked this knowledge management feature, but this is something that is very, very important for us, because in the end, it's people on the ground that will apply the different solutions that you thought about.
Got it. Now let's get a little bit into the actual technologies itself, right? And I'm just going to mention a few, and feel free, Richard, Chits as well, to jump into it if any of these technologies make sense for you, right? So, there's questions from the floor as well around AI, ML, right? Blockchain, right? And even that supply chain visibility type of thing. Is real-time visibility important? Because that is a different type of technology versus a pure traceability type technology. So I'll just open it, right? Anybody has a perspective around AI, ML, or blockchain? Either relating to supply chain visibility or any parts of logistics that you think is relevant for these type of technologies.
Sure. Mr. Vichin, would you like to go first?
Yeah, maybe I'll give a few comments from what we have heard also from companies trying to adopt this technology. So I think supply chain visibility has increased in importance, not least because one, the disruptions has led to many companies realizing that they don't quite know who their suppliers are, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers are. That's one dimension. The other one is to deal with how they better deal with the demand forecasting. I mean, the word is that forecasting is always wrong anyway, but because of the volatility that we are seeing today, it becomes harder and harder for demand and supply planners to really make those decisions around how much to produce, how much to store, where to distribute, how to distribute. So I think many companies that have also approached us have started to talk about how they could establish some of these control towers where they would like to transform their supply chains, digitize, and really get a better handle of the visibility of their supply chains. At times, it doesn't have to be real time. It can be near real time. It really depends on the business that they are in. But you can see a greater demand for that prior to perhaps COVID. And so I think for us, it's about understanding how companies are trying to transform. And as an ecosystem and community, which is why I was really keen to participate in this, is to see how we can help companies, help individuals, practitioners to adopt tools, technologies like AI, ML. So I think AI, ML will be quite a big piece of this visibility topic that you mentioned.
So, and Richard, just hooking on there a little bit more. So let's say, for example, a corporate or any of those that want to deploy such capabilities, control tower, there's some AI, ML inbuilt into it, right? Be it for predictions or data cleansing or any of the like, and maybe they need some blockchain related stuff for visibility through the multi-tier and multi-echelons within the supply chains, right? How can EDB support these companies when they're looking at these technologies?
So I think on one end, we would like to understand exactly what their needs are, because I think it's always important to know what the problem statements or the desired outcomes are before kind of prescribing a particular solution. But then at the same time, I think my team is looking at how we can map out all the solution providers, all the technology providers that can then support these companies. So in a way, I think we are trying to do a little bit of catalyzing of demand and supply in this space. And in between, if we do need to intervene by supporting companies in developing the talent, because at the end of it, the technologies are there, but I think it's the deployment, it's the adoption, it's getting supply chain professionals to move away from their Excel sheets to new tools. I think those are conversations we like to have with companies.
That's great, Richard. I really like to hear, you say that, especially because it helps the industry move forward, right? And a lot of companies do have more questions than answers. May, Chits, and Fabian, I'd like to hear some perspectives around use cases that you found useful either within your organizations or in other organizations of AI, ML, or blockchain type, or even 3D printing. How much of these cases are actually relevant and deployable here versus just what you read on white papers, right?
So I think, sorry, so a couple of things. I think from AI and ML perspective, if you look at, there are two ways to think about deploying any technology in supply chains. That's what that's a template that I have in my mind. One is to understand what is happening, and second is to understand what is going to happen, right? So what is going to happen is probably your ML AI bit, where real ML or AI works to understand. And what is happening is to understand obviously what is happening, understanding from an operational point of view whether the cargo is delayed and so on. But it is also to feed the data into the AI and ML piece to understand what is going to happen, right? So that's how I would think about it. There are a couple of areas where we see it happening in real time. One is basically to that is first is obviously the logistics movement, right? So now there are models, and where GoComet is also working on is to understand what is the impact of we have, let's say like a mid-ocean container or something, or a truck going from A to B, right? So a lot of things you can understand from what could be the weather report. Is there a possibility of a cyclone that is coming in? Or another way to think about it is okay, in the last say 6 months or the last 3 months, have most of the vessels or most of the containers that are going on this particular port been delayed, right? This is where ML works. Can you learn and can you figure out what is the correlation between them, right? And in this case, if you are able to understand a fair amount of correlations, you can fairly say that these are the set of correlations that are causing it. Correlation does not mean causation in a lot of things, but if you look at this data, so this is actual use of ML that we feel, and we are on it, right, working on it. Second area of ML is the decision making and contextualizing a lot of things. So for instance, a lot of companies, the logistics people have to take certain decisions, right? And a lot of information exchange is very, very contextual. Like for example, in a typical supply chain approval of a BL, right? There are still, a lot of times there are a lot of standard issues that are there, right? Now, if I were to teach you, Mark, or somebody were to teach me, I would be able to solve them, right? It's very standard stuff, right? Okay, these are 5 things that you need to check. Three things that might have a spelling mistake and so on, right? Similarly with other documentation, maybe the packing list, right? Now, once you start emulating and teaching the computer to do that, that is the usage of a machine learning algorithm, right? You contextually make the computer learn that, okay, these are the set of issues, these are the set of solutions, and then you don't need a human being to actually do that. So these are 2 areas where we see some real-time use cases when it comes to using ML. I can't talk about 3D and blockchain, but 3D blockchain maybe I can, but would love to understand what others are thinking.
Thanks, Chits. Maybe May, on to you. What have you seen that maybe are more interesting or applicable for AI, blockchain, 3D printing?
Yeah, AI, ML is again another buzzword that gets thrown around a lot. When we first kind of sat down and think about AI, ML, one of the first things that we learned is that it's actually pretty widely deployed in general. anyways already. So the first example we always talk about at the Innovation Center is everyone touched AI ML every day in their lives. Google Maps does that. You know, if you are exposed to some of the Google Calendar, they also even predict your time to travel every morning to work. So from a logistics standpoint, that application is already there in many parts. And then we talk about other applications, right? A lot of the current applications of AI ML is in the area of data analytics and prediction analytics. Can you, as what the previous speakers talked about, can you predict volumes, capacity? Can you optimize? There are other applications in terms of NLPs. Can you, have sentiment analysis? Can you understand, convert paper documentation in a way that the business understands the goods that's flowing through a enterprise when information is crisscrossing everywhere in many different formats? Can we be smart about consolidating this information to allow us to make smart decisions? Tools out there exist, and companies are already experimenting or even having products that talk about having full digital twin visibility or near live, status of your supply chain, and having, behind the scenes AI emulating what the decision should be. Tools are out there. The challenge in many companies is the data is extremely fragmented and the quality is not consistent across board. In an extremely fragmented market like logistics, that it's not a technology problem. It is really sort of the SOP problem statement to coordinate all the different, processes and behaviors of different parties to have an end-to-end supply chain view. That's where sometimes, a lot of times, blockchain comes into play, right? And a year or two back, we were super excited about blockchain, thinking that that could solve the world's problems, offering, the ultimate supply chain visibility. But at the end of the day, the challenge is really getting all the different players to provide the right data and information and be able to work together. And at the end of the day, a lot of blockchain proof of concept gets really reduced down to a sort of track and trace use case, which can easily be resolved in a very simple, cloud-based tool that is very prevalent today. So I would really always talk about opportunities from a problem statement standpoint. Let's understand the problem before we go into looking at different technology, deep tech or not, to then throw at the problem.
Thanks, May. Thanks very much. And on the blockchain piece, I wonder, anybody in this panel has had experience a blockchain use case that has gone past POC into production, into impactful production?
On our side, we're not at, we're basically at the MVP stage and working on business model on a quite complicated blockchain project for the aerospace industry, where basically where it makes sense compared to what May was just mentioning, that for typically track and trace, a cloud solution, customer can connect and see where the product is, makes perfect sense. There are more complicated supply chains where there is a very, very fragmented chain of custody, where you have a single part, typically aerospace, when you do repairs or an overhaul on a plane. Your spare parts will change hands and change of custody a number of times through its life cycle, and every repair, every time that someone physically touches the part needs to be recorded. And right now, everything is faced with paper. And, you see where I'm going, right? You have lots of data on paper, unstructured, that nobody can use, and everybody, well, at least the OEMs and the airlines and the leasers and all these guys, they want to have access to this data. So here, there's a real opportunity, thanks to blockchain and smart contracts, especially, to really be able to track all these changes of custody and to know exactly who interferes with the product at any given point in time. So in this case, it makes sense. And here, as I was mentioning earlier, the technical side of things, so the technical part of the smart contracts typically are mature. It's more a question of making sure that in a heavily regulated industry, really respect all the regulations across the board on a global scale, and that all the people representing of the different parts of the industry, they all be together, not only on the functional requirements, but also on the business model, how much the solution is supposed to cost, what are the benefits for the early stage investors in the solution, and so on. And we're moving forward, slowly, but moving forward.
So I've seen blockchain, over the past couple of years, move from that pure technology, trying to find a use case for blockchain, and in the whole startup and innovation space right now, it has moved into looking at, like what May mentioned, solution first, right? What's the problem you're trying to solve? And oh, by the way, we are using some blockchain technologies behind it. Oh, we are using some ML stuff behind it as well, right? So instead of it being first and foremost technology centric, it becomes a bit more solution centric, right? What's the problem? What's the solution? And what's the kind of technologies to be used to solve that particular solution, which shows the maturity in the industry, actually. Yeah.
I think when you're back with with our hammers looking for nails, and now we're nail and we're trying to figure out whether it's a nail or a screw or something else.
Right. Okay, we've got a time check here. I'd like to end off the discussion, with each of your thoughts around what are the one or two technologies to look out for, right, that you might think will be impactful for the industry and why, right? Maybe let's start with Wei Xuan, Chits, Fabian, and then me.
Thank you, Mark. I think maybe I might not be answering your question too directly, but I find that actually today the technologies and tools are there. I think what's probably most impactful is the level of adoption. And the most important thing is actually how people are able to adapt to that change. And I've heard some companies who struggle with the transformation because the workforce is hesitant in adopting the new tools. So I think the focus, it would be great to continue to see all these technologies come to fruition, but I would like to really see how the workforce would embrace them. And I think that would be the key delta that we can see in our community.
Do you think that it's a corporate top-down perspective, or do you see it to be a workforce mentality perspective?
I think at the first level, corporate must be willing to spend to a certain extent or invest in. You need to have a certain level of mandate. I think most of the panelists will agree with that. Then second of all, it's probably not just the workforce, but perhaps the managers who runs the workforce. How do you bring your people along? How do you execute the change management? And I think at some point, people will have to come to realize, particularly in Singapore, that you do need to adopt technology in order to gain that competitive advantage, just because of our cost structures that we have here.
Which might be different from the rest of our neighbors.
Yes, they can probably afford to be still reliant on pure labor for a while compared to us.
Got it. Thanks, Vichen. Chits?
Thanks, Mark. So, I mean, I'm a technology company, so I feel that in my heart, we will create a large impact. But jokes apart, so, I mean, I would think 2-3 things. One, from the point Mr. Vichen said, that fundamentally a collaborative tool these days. I mean, what are we going through, right? I mean, factory teams are working differently, accounts payable teams are working differently, it's very bespoke, right? So first and foremost would be some sort of collaborative tools to kind of ensure that this entire thing is, running in the right sync. Earlier, it was very easy, right? In the office, you can go this documentation is not signed, this email has not been replied, but now it's a bit tricky, right? So first and foremost, I would think that collaborative tools will be coming, and we can see a lot of these collaborative tools in startups and forward-looking, more forward tech-looking industries like Slack is coming up, right? But there are not much of collaborative tools when it talks about freight supply chains or supply chains. It's not still a lot, right? It's still happening the way it was. So I think that is one technology which will be becoming bigger. We build that, and apart from that, I would say decision making, right? So earlier, let's say probably 10 years back or 5 years back, decision making was largely looking at your own data. I mean, what is happening at, say, a company ABC. But now a lot of the decision making can be made better and smarter when you link it to the market. And these days it is very much possible, like, because of the speed of the internet connectivity, right? So again, market linked decision making and using machine learning to do that better and better. This is done by a lot of larger companies globally, like, a lot of technologies there, like all the large companies, SAPs of the world, Power BI, Tableau, these kind of things, these kind of tools are now doing that. But still, I would say it's very, very rare to see when it comes to supply chain and logistics, I would say. Supply chains, yeah. But so these two areas I would see will be becoming bigger.
Thanks, Chits. So you're building the Slack for supply chains, I guess.
Yeah.
And just a plug in here, our first investment as a fund was into a decision-making AI company out of Cambridge as well.
The right track.
Fabian, what are the one or two areas for you?
Well, going back to what we said about data analytics and AI, I think for us the biggest roadblock is the cost to build data models. So I think the real breakthrough will be to leverage process mining, probably a way to reconcile structured and unstructured data using NLP and probably a lot of AI as well. But basically any kind of way that we can find to make it a lot faster and a lot more accurate to build the data models. We then need to run all the analytics. This will, I think, be the breakthrough that will enable us to really use predictive models down the road. Yeah, again, on a deep tech perspective, this is one. Probably another selling to AI would be cheaper vision systems. For us, this is again the roadblock that we have today to automate more our warehousing operations. Vision systems and automated navigation systems still cost a lot of money because of the hardware and because of the software. Yeah, these are probably the two areas where we'd expect some major breakthroughs down the road.
Fabian, this is relating to e-commerce mainly, or just general vision systems?
No, general vision systems. Typically, we have a lot of different industries where we have to do some piece picking. So very small item order fulfillment. So of course, e-commerce comes to mind, but also Wishun was mentioning earlier that Singapore is still in the spotlight in terms of regional distribution centers. But if you want to be good at that, you need to also be good at late differentiation of products. So basically customizing the products to serve all the different local markets with labels, with kits, with whatever comes to mind. But you need to be able to handle all these products, and we do that millions of times in a year, and we have hundreds of people in Singapore doing that right now. So there is a huge stake in being able to start automating these tasks, and with more than POC, we really need to go full steam ahead on that. And vision system is really part of it, because we typically, to do that, you do make to order, so it's small batches, high mix, low volume kind of thing, and you can't teach a robot without a vision system. You can't teach a robot anything. So yeah, we need that.
Got it. Thanks, Fabian. We're kind of out of time, but I'd like to give me 2 minutes. What are your top 1 or 2 thinking around this topic? May, you're on mute.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. So I would echo what the previous speakers have all mentioned. At DHL, we've been experimenting for the last 10 years through the Innovation Center, working directly with our operations. And one of the largest challenge that we have really is to scale up an innovation technology, from 1 or 2 POCs, or a string of different POCs to a global scalability level. And I like to think about the supply chain or logistics in 2 tracks, right? One is the physical piece, which is really about the automation, what Fabian was talking about, the different picks that you might think is repetitive and very easy to do, but for robots, it's not so easy. So there, I think there's still a lot of room for improvement from a deep tech standpoint, to have our new generations of smart engineers deploying AI and ML, computer vision, to really improve on that aspect of the physical productivity, and hands-free approach to what is traditionally extremely manual. Speaking to some of our potential clients, they were also quite shocked that the DHL has 500,000 employees worldwide. It is a very manual, business at the end of the day. Then we talked a lot about data. The information system through the supply chain is something that I think continues to be, a deep focus for us. Aside from going deep, I think a lot of problems can be solved by sort of the first level ML and AI that is not too difficult to deploy at an instant. But the challenge is really, how do we scale worldwide again, right? With this very, big variety of levels of maturity in our data systems. And I'd like to echo Wei Xuan's point on people. I struggle to hire data scientists everywhere. I struggle to hire a diversified data scientists, men, women, mixed nationalities. It is a challenge, and without the right people, you can't scale. And as consultants, we do a nice piece of AI ML solution, hand over to the business, and they struggle to keep up with deploying that in their business. So there's 2 solutions to this, right? One is to have these great low-code or no-code platforms that allows us to scale. Or governments like EDB has been instrumental in championing this, to influence universities to really focus on the right technology to skill up our new generation to come into the workforce, because we desperately need them.
Thanks, May. And with that, we are 4 minutes over time, but it was a very good discussion. Thank you so much for the great panel discussions. And thank you for listening in, the participants who have stayed with us the entire hour. Jody, over to you.
Thank you, Mark, for the great moderation of the session. And also thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to Mei, to Wei Xuan, to Chitrans, as well as Fabian. And it was very nice to hear on the different perspectives on what everyone felt on the supply chain's demands and needs, and how things have changed in the logistics industry, such as in distribution and visibility. I also like to thank all of our attendees for tuning in and staying for the whole session. And while we may not be able to answer to everyone's questions or finish the conversation due to time constraints, I hope that we still managed to give some takeaways from the session. For the attendees, also please keep a lookout for our post-event EDM mailer, which will include a video recording of today's session, as well as more information on the panel. And we also hope for everyone to continue to support our events at SGInnovate, and have a great day ahead. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.